now not acceptable. Discrimination against women, child labor, public execution, the gibbets, torture, slavery, etc., are no longer acceptable now. It is admitted that there are places where some of these practices are still carried out, but generally, the civilized world rejects them, even if they had been common for thousands of years of their history. So why cannot we reject war? Why cannot we make war a crime, a dastardly crime, deserving of the most severe punishment? Because we do not regard war as a crime, the mass killings have not stopped. In the First and Second World Wars, 70 million people were killed. But the world today accepts this with equanimity. They were wars, so the killings were justified. And today we are still seeing people being killed in wars as the great military powers resort to it to resolve any problem, big and small, which they may have with other countries, especially those which are no match for them. 7,000 years ago, the number of people killed in any war must be very small. This is because the capacity to kill was limited. The weapons would be wooden clubs and sharpened sticks. Then the most civilized began to invent new weapons, from stick to stone to ever harder metals. Knives, swords were invented. Sharp edges or points made killing much easier. Bows and arrows followed, extending the reach of the weapons of war. The Chinese invented gunpowder, but not for killing. Mostly the explosives were for chasing imaginary devils and dragons which threatened to swallow the moon. The Europeans came across the gunpowder and immediately thought that it could be used in war for throwing projectiles a longer distance than the catapult or bows and arrows. From then on, the search for ways to hurl weapons further and further has never stopped. Apart from that, the killing power of the missiles had been enhanced continually. Now we can literally throw, shoot, or rocket the most destructive weapons right around the globe and beyond. We now have the capacity to literally blow up this whole planet and every living soul on it. The search for the most powerful weapon should really be over. Everyone should now know that a war can actually exterminate the whole of humanity, including the very people who use the nuclear weapons. Using it would amount to mass suicide. Both the victors and the victims would perish. War would therefore be totally counterproductive. Imagine a nuclear war with bombs, nuclear bombs, and nuclear warheads being hurled at each other. If there are survivors, radiation would kill them all. Truly, war should no longer be an option in the settlement of disputes between nations. But the fact is that the powerful nations of the world were not affected by the devastations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Mostly they see nuclear weapons as deterrents against attacks against themselves. Far from outlawing nuclear weapons as they did with poison gas, they began developing ever more powerful nuclear weapons and delivery systems. As a result, the United States and the Soviet Union, France and Britain rushed to acquire the knowledge and the capacities to produce nuclear weapons. During the Cold War years, the United States and the USSR built up huge arsenals of nuclear warheads. Between them, there were more than 20,000 nuclear warheads sufficient to destroy the whole world many times over. China, France, and Britain also have huge arsenals of nuclear weapons. Germany and Japan are not allowed to possess nuclear weapons, but Israel, India, and Pakistan have nuclear capabilities. There seems to be some basis for the idea of nuclear deterrence. Although the United States appeared ready to use nuclear weapons during the Cuban crisis, in the end it decided to compromise by removing its nuclear missiles in Turkey, which was obviously threatening Russia. It was fortunate that both the leaders of these two nuclear powers came to their senses in time. Otherwise, the world would have been devastated by nuclear weapons in the arsenals of these two powers. We cannot afford to have this kind of brinkmanship. We cannot live in fear of one or two persons destroying this world and its 6.5 billion people. We cannot allow our civilization to be terminated by some crazy precedent. A nuclear deterrent is just too risky and too very dangerous. Maybe it was this thought that prompted the idea of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. But all these international resolutions were non-starters because the big nuclear powers blatantly ignored them. As a result, we see other countries developing their own nuclear weapons. There is much ado about these countries having nuclear weapons. These countries would be mad to use the few primitive nuclear weapons that they have. Should they do so, the powerful nuclear countries would wipe out these countries from the surface of this earth. The real danger is still from the rich and powerful nuclear powers. It is they who must reduce and finally eliminate their nuclear weapons if they want to have the moral ground to enforce the non-proliferation treaty. Unfortunately, these great nuclear powers are still developing, testing, and producing more nuclear weapons. They talk of safe nuclear bombs, of small nuclear bombs, and tactical nuclear bombs. Already they are using depleted uranium in their bombs and missiles, which are causing diseases like cancer to spread among hundreds and thousands who had survived their attacks. But they are not stopping there. They have developed bombs to penetrate deep into the ground so that bomb shells